Maya Takeda's Louboutin heels clicked purposefully across the courthouse's marble floor, each step echoing through the vaulted ceiling of the historic building. The morning light streamed through towering windows, casting long shadows that danced across the walls, adorned with portraits of judges from centuries past. Her Armani suit jacket, impeccably tailored in charcoal gray, reflected her status as one of Los Angeles' most sought-after mediators, though few in the bustling morning crowd seemed to notice. Inside her Bottega Veneta briefcase, alongside the parking notice that brought her here, lay 3 folders containing details of cases that would shape the future of international business. The topmost file outlined a delicate negotiation between Japan's largest semiconductor manufacturer and a Silicon Valley tech giant, a $2.3 billion deal hanging by a thread. Below that, documents for a Malaysian sustainable energy project waited for her expert touch, and at the bottom, a high-stakes negotiation between competing artificial intelligence firms that the media hadn't caught wind of yet. Maya checked her Cartier watch, 8:43 a.m. The parking matter was scheduled for 9 o'clock, leaving her just enough time to review her notes for the afternoon's video conference with Tokyo. Her phone buzzed silently. Another message from her assistant about the Reuters interview scheduled for tomorrow. That wanted her insights on emerging trends in international mediation, particularly her recent success in preventing a trade war between tech conglomerates. The courthouse security guard, an elderly man named Frank, who had worked there for 3 decades, smiled warmly as she approached. "Good morning, Miss Takeda," he said, recognition flashing across his face. She had mediated his grandson's school dispute last year, pro bono, turning a potential expulsion into a learning opportunity for both students and administration. The metal detector beeped as she passed through, and she carefully placed her briefcase on the conveyor belt. In the corridor leading to Courtroom 3, Maya's phone lit up with another notification. The South Korean ambassador was requesting her expertise in a sensitive corporate merger. She made a mental note to have her office schedule a preliminary discussion for next week. Her mind raced through potential strategies, drawing from her extensive experience in Asian markets and her deep understanding of cultural nuances that often eluded other mediators. As she approached the courtroom doors, Maya reflected on the irony of her situation. Just yesterday, she had been in a private jet returning from Singapore, where she'd successfully mediated a complex shipping dispute that had threatened to disrupt Pacific trade routes. Today, she was here for a simple parking misunderstanding, a result of construction work obscuring crucial signage near her office. The contrast almost made her smile. The wooden benches of Courtroom 3 were already filling with the morning's cases. Maya settled into a spot near the back, extracting a slim folder containing the parking notice and related photographs. Around her, nervous energy radiated from others waiting for their cases to be called. A young intern from her firm, Jason, had offered to handle this matter for her, but Maya believed in taking personal responsibility, no matter how minor the issue. She observed the room with the same attention to detail that had made her legendary in mediation circles. The court clerk efficiently organized papers, her movements precise and practiced. The bailiff stood with perfect posture, his eyes constantly scanning the room. And there, entering through the side door, came Judge Robert Wilson, known for his swift decisions and unwavering adherence to protocol. Maya drew a deep breath, centered herself as she did before every major negotiation. Her fingers brushed against her lucky charm, a small jade pendant her grandmother had given her before she left Japan to study at Harvard Law. 20 years of international mediation experience had taught her to read rooms, personalities, and situations with remarkable accuracy. Yet something in Judge Wilson's demeanor, the way his eyes swept across the courtroom without really seeing, suggested this morning might unfold differently than she anticipated. The clock struck 9, and the bailiff's voice rang out clear and strong. "All rise. The Superior Court of Los Angeles County is now in session, the Honorable Judge Robert Wilson presiding." Judge Robert Wilson's gavel tapped softly against his desk as he scanned the morning's docket. 38 cases to process before lunch, a light day by his standards. He prided himself on running the most efficient courtroom in Los Angeles County, earning him both admirers and critics within the legal community. His reputation for swift justice had featured in last month's Legal Times, though the article had hinted at concerns about his rapid-fire approach. Case number 2847B, the clerk announced, her voice carrying across the now-hushed courtroom. Parking violation on Western Avenue, respondent Maya Takeda. Maya rose gracefully, her movement drawing subtle attention from the other attendees. She approached the podium with the same measured confidence she used in boardrooms from Tokyo to New York. The morning light streaming through the high windows caught the subtle shimmer of her silk blouse, a gift from the CEO of a Malaysian tech firm after she'd salvaged their failing merger. Judge Wilson barely glanced up from his papers. Ms. Takeda, you're contesting a parking violation from March 15th. How do you plead? Your Honor, I'd like to provide context for this situation, Maya began, her voice clear and measured. She reached into her briefcase for the photographs she'd carefully prepared, showing the construction equipment that had obscured the parking signage. As you'll see from these images, Ms. Takeda, Judge Wilson interrupted, his tone clipped. A simple guilty or not guilty will suffice. His fingers drummed against his desk, a habit he'd developed over 15 years on the bench. The golden nameplate before him caught the fluorescent light, a reminder of his authority. Maya paused, years of negotiation experience telling her to choose her next words carefully. Not guilty, Your Honor. The signage was completely obscured by construction equipment, making it impossible for any reasonable person to. The city's records show no authorized construction on Western Avenue that day. Judge Wilson cut in again, shuffling through papers without looking at Maya's evidence. The sign's visibility is not in question. This court's time is valuable, Ms. Takeda. In the gallery, a young law student frantically took notes, clearly fascinated by the exchange. Maya noticed his pen freeze mid-sentence as Judge Wilson's tone grew sharper. She thought of her upcoming lecture at Yale Law School about the importance of listening in legal proceedings. The irony wasn't lost on her. Your Honor, I have documentation from the construction company, Maya continued, maintaining her professional composure. The same composure that had kept peace during heated negotiations between rival tech giants last month. Their permits show. Judge Wilson's gavel cracked sharply against the sound block. Ms. Takeda, this court isn't interested in excuses. The fine is $500, plus court costs. Next case. The amount was insignificant to someone of Maya's status. Her last mediation fee could have covered it 1,000 times over. Yet she stood her ground, not for the money, but for the principle. Your Honor, I respectfully request. That will be all, Ms. Takeda, Judge Wilson declared firmly, already reaching for the next case file. Failure to pay within 30 days will result in additional penalties. Bailiff, please ensure Ms. Takeda has the necessary payment information. Maya gathered her untouched evidence with deliberate care, her mind already analyzing the interaction like one of her complex negotiations. As she turned to leave, she caught sight of her reflection in the courtroom's wooden panels, the same reflection that had stared back at her from countless boardroom windows during high-stakes mediations. Her expression revealed nothing, but her thoughts were already turning to her afternoon appointment. The bailiff approached with a payment form, his apologetic smile suggesting he'd witnessed similar scenes before. Maya accepted the paper with a gracious nod, her grandmother's jade pendant cool against her skin. As she walked back through the now murmuring courtroom, her phone vibrated. Another message about the International Mediation Summit, where she would be the keynote speaker tomorrow. Judge Wilson was already deep into the next case, his efficiency unimpeded by what he considered another routine morning interaction. Neither he nor Maya could have predicted how their paths would cross again, or how this brief encounter would ripple through the Los Angeles legal community in the days to come. The Grand Plaza Hotel's crystal ballroom sparkled with understated elegance, its chandeliers casting warm light over the gathering of legal luminaries. Judge Robert Wilson adjusted his bow tie as he entered, nodding to familiar faces from the circuit court. The International Mediation Summit had drawn hundreds of prestigious attendees, though he'd initially considered skipping it until he received a personal invitation from the Chief Justice herself. Names on the reserved placards caught his eye as he made his way to his assigned seat: a Supreme Court justice, 3 federal judges, and the Attorney General of California. The front row, where his own name was displayed on cream-colored cardstock, seemed unnecessarily prominent for what he assumed would be another dry lecture on alternative dispute resolution. Robert called out Judge Maria Hernandez, his colleague from the appellate court. "Did you see the speaker list? We're in for quite a treat." She gestured to the elegant program in her hands, bound in leather with gold embossing. Wilson hadn't bothered to open his yet, his mind still lingering on the morning's caseload. The ballroom hummed with anticipation as Supreme Court Justice Eleanor Chen took the podium. "Distinguished colleagues," she began, her voice warm with admiration. "Today we have the privilege of hearing from someone who has revolutionized international mediation. Her recent work prevented a trillion-dollar trade war between leading tech companies, and her innovative approach to conflict resolution has become required reading at Harvard Law." Judge Wilson reached for his water glass, half listening. He'd attended enough of these conferences to know the routine, theoretical approaches that rarely translated to the real world of his courtroom. Last month, the United Nations appointed her to lead their new Global Mediation Task Force. Justice Chen continued. The Wall Street Journal called her the peacemaker of Silicon Valley, and Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in international law. A subtle shift rippled through the audience as a figure rose from the side of the stage. Judge Wilson's glass froze halfway of his lips. "Please welcome our keynote speaker, Maya Takeda." The water glass trembled slightly in his hand as Maya approached the podium with the same graceful confidence she'd shown in his courtroom hours earlier. Now, however, she wore a deep blue Chanel suit that seemed to command the very light in the room. The jade pendant at her neck caught the gleam of the chandeliers as she smiled at the assembled judiciary. "Your Honors," Maya began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "Today we'll explore how listening, truly listening, can transform our legal system." Her eyes swept the room, pausing for just a fraction of a second on Judge Wilson. If she recognized him, her expression revealed nothing. Behind her, a screen displayed her credentials: degrees from Harvard and Tokyo University, advisory positions at the World Economic Forum, successful mediations of disputes worth over $50 billion. The young law clerk next to Wilson whispered in awe about Maya's recent resolution of the Pacific Rim technology crisis, a case that had made international headlines. Judge Wilson sank deeper into his chair as Maya shared a story about a complex mediation between rival aerospace companies. Her approach had saved thousands of jobs and prevented a devastating industry collapse. The Chinese ambassador, seated 2 rows behind Wilson, nodded appreciatively. He'd been involved in those negotiations. "In my experience," Maya continued, "the most crucial moments in mediation often come from unexpected places." She paused, allowing her words to resonate. "Sometimes, the most valuable insights arise from situations where we feel dismissed or unheard." Wilson's collar felt suddenly tight as he recognized his own behavior reflected in her words. The morning's interaction played back in his mind, each dismissive gesture and interruption now magnified by the weight of her accomplishments. His legal pad remained blank, though others around him scribbled notes frantically. A gentle murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience as Maya described her methodology for handling high-stakes negotiations. Justice Chen beamed from her seat, clearly pleased with the presentation's impact. And there sat Judge Robert Wilson, the most efficient judge in Los Angeles County, learning a profound lesson about judgment from someone he dismissed mere hours ago. Maya's voice carried a quiet authority that held the crystal ballroom in rapt attention. Behind her, slides displayed graphs charting the success rates of her mediation techniques, but it was her storytelling that captivated the audience. She moved away from the podium, choosing to walk slowly across the stage, as she shared her insights. Last year in Singapore, she began, her heels silent against the plush carpet. I faced two CEOs who refused to even sit in the same room. Their company's intellectual property dispute had escalated to the point where 20,000 jobs hung in the balance. She paused, allowing the weight of the number to settle. In the front row, Judge Wilson found himself leaning forward despite his discomfort. The solution didn't come from legal precedents or corporate regulations. Maya continued, her hand touching the jade pendant that had become her trademark in international business circles. It came from listening to what wasn't being said. One CEO's father had built his company from nothing. The other had spent decades protecting her innovations. This wasn't about patents. It was about legacy. The room remained silent as Maya shared how she transformed their conflict into a partnership. Instead of a costly legal battle, the companies now shared a research facility in Osaka. Forbes had called it the deal of the decade. The Malaysian finance minister, seated near the stage, nodded in approval. His country's tech sector had benefited significantly from the resolution. But sometimes, Maya's tone shifted subtly. The most interesting negotiations happen in unexpected places. She clicked to a new slide showing the interior of a courthouse. Judge Wilson's throat tightened. Every interaction is an opportunity to either build bridges or reinforce walls. As she outlined her methodology for breaking down communication barriers, Wilson found himself remembering each moment from their morning encounter. The evidence he refused to examine, the explanations he cut short, the assumptions he'd made before she'd even spoken. In my recent TED talk, Maya continued, referencing a presentation that had gained over 5 million views in 3 days, I discussed how power dynamics influence our ability to listen. When we believe we have complete authority in a situation, we often miss crucial information. The Supreme Court Justice scribbled notes enthusiastically, while the Attorney General typed rapidly on his tablet. Maya's next slide displayed a quote from her upcoming book, already topping Amazon's pre-order list. True authority comes not from the power to speak, but from the wisdom to listen. She shared another case study, a delicate negotiation between competing artificial intelligence firms where she discovered both companies were actually trying to solve the same ethical dilemma. By creating space for genuine dialogue, she explained, we transformed competitors into collaborators. Their joint ethical AI initiative now sets industry standards. Judge Wilson's pen remained motionless above his legal pad. Each word Maya spoke seemed to illuminate his morning behavior with uncomfortable clarity. Around him, colleagues who had witnessed his swift justice approach over the years were nodding at Maya's insights about the importance of contextual understanding. Consider this, Maya said, her gaze sweeping the room, lingering for just a moment on Wilson. Every person who stands before you carries a context you haven't yet discovered. The CDO sitting in your office might also be a parent struggling with a difficult decision. The lawyer presenting a case might have insights that could transform your understanding. The person contesting a simple parking ticket, her lips curved slightly, might have spent decades mastering the very skills our justice system needs most. The room erupted in appreciative laughter at what they perceived as a hypothetical example. Justice Chen nodded approvingly. This was exactly why she'd insisted on Maya as the keynote speaker. Near the back, a group of young clerks whispered excitedly about Maya's upcoming Yale Law seminar, already oversubscribed with a waitlist of hundreds. Judge Wilson sat perfectly still, his earlier confidence replaced by a profound understanding of how thoroughly he had misjudged not just Maya Takeda, but perhaps countless others who had stood before his bench. As Maya moved into her conclusion, he found himself wondering how many opportunities for justice he had missed in his pursuit of efficiency. Sleep eluded Judge Wilson as he sat in his study, the clock on his mahogany desk showing 1:47 a.m. His television played Maya Takeda's TED Talk, The Art of Listening in a World of Noise, for the third time that evening. The replay offered no comfort, only sharper clarity of his morning's failure. On screen, Maya stood before an audience of thousands, her red dress a stark contrast to the morning's courtroom attire. In every negotiation, she explained, there's a moment when someone needs to be brave enough to pause. The video cut to scenes of her working with world leaders, tech giants, and humanitarian organizations. Her recent resolution of the Asia-Pacific semiconductor crisis had prevented an economic downturn that could have affected millions. Wilson reached for the remote, pausing on a frame where Maya addressed the United Nations General Assembly. His morning coffee grew cold beside a stack of files, tomorrow's cases that suddenly seemed to demand more attention than his usual efficient review would allow. The Wall Street Journal article about Maya's mediation style lay open on his desk, its headline now seeming to mock him. The woman who makes billion-dollar problems disappear. His phone buzzed, a message from Judge Hernandez. Incredible keynote today. Mine is joining the Judicial Reform Committee next month. Thought you want to know. Wilson set the phone down without responding. The weight of his actions pressed heavier with each new revelation of Maya's influence and expertise. He pulled up the courthouse security footage from that morning, something he'd never done before for a simple parking case. The video played silently on his laptop, showing a different perspective of the interaction. He watched himself, barely looking up as Maya attempted to present her evidence. His dismissive gestures, so habitual he hadn't even noticed them at the time, now seemed glaringly obvious. The footage continued, showing Maya's dignified exit from his courtroom. Minutes later, the camera caught her taking a call in the hallway. Probably the same call mentioned in tomorrow's Financial Times article about her orchestrating a breakthrough in renewable energy negotiations between competing tech companies. The contrast between his treatment and her stature in the international community made him wince. His eyes drifted to the judicial awards lining his study walls. Most Efficient Circuit Court Judge 2023 seemed less prestigious now, almost accusatory in the dim light. He prided himself on running a tight courtroom, processing cases with maximum efficiency. But Maya's words from the summit echoed in his mind. Justice rushed is justice compromised. The TED talk resumed automatically. The greatest obstacle to understanding often isn't lack of information. It's the illusion that we already understand. The audience applauded as Maya shared how she transformed a bitter corporate rivalry into a partnership that now provided educational technology to underserved communities worldwide. Wilson opened his court calendar for the next day. 27 cases, each one he would typically process in under 10 minutes. He began making notes, questions he should ask, context he should seek. The efficiency rating he'd maintained for 5 years might suffer, but Maya's voice from the summit haunted him. Every case deserves not just our judgment, but our understanding. His reflection in the dark window seemed different now, older, perhaps, or simply more aware. The same window that had witnessed countless late nights of rapid case reviews now watched him confront uncomfortable truths about his approach to justice. A notification popped up on his laptop, the morning news already featuring stories about Maya's summit speech. The Associated Press called it a masterclass in judicial wisdom. The irony wasn't lost on him, but the woman he'd dismissed so readily was now teaching his profession about the very qualities he'd failed to demonstrate. As dawn approached, Judge Wilson finally closed his laptop. Tomorrow's cases waited, but for the first time in years, he wasn't focused on how quickly he could process them. Instead, he wondered about the stories he'd missed, the context he'd ignored, and the justice he might have rushed past in his pursuit of efficiency. The Take It to Mediation group occupied the entire 47th floor of downtown LA's most prestigious office tower. Judge Wilson stepped out of the elevator into a space that perfectly balanced Eastern minimalism with Western sophistication. A wall of awards glinted in the California sunshine. The Nobel Peace Prize nomination certificate held central placement, flanked by international honors from governments and corporations worldwide. Maya's assistant, Kevin Park, greeted him with a bow that seemed to acknowledge both his judicial position and his current role as a visitor seeking amends. Ms. Takeda is concluding a video call with the Singapore Prime Minister, he explained, leading Wilson through a gallery of photographs. Each image told a story of Maya's impact: her handshake with tech billionaires after preventing a patent war, her address at the World Economic Forum, her meeting with world leaders at climate change negotiations. The waiting area offered a view of the Pacific Ocean, but Wilson found himself drawn to a display case containing a single item: the jade pendant Maya always wore. Beside it, a small plaque shared its story: a gift from my grandmother, who taught me that true strength lies in understanding others. An interesting choice of reading material. Maya's voice came from behind him. She stood in her office doorway, elegant in a burgundy Valentino suit, her presence somehow both welcoming and formidable. The morning sunlight caught the silver threads in her silk scarf, a gift from the Empress of Japan after Maya's successful mediation of a historical property dispute. Wilson turned, finding himself unusually uncertain of protocol. In his chambers, the dynamic would be clear. Here, in her domain, surrounded by evidence of her global influence, he felt the weight of their previous encounter shift dramatically. "Please come in." Maya gestured toward her office, a serene space with floor-to-ceiling windows. A delicate tea set waited on a low table, antique pottery that Wilson recognized from his daughter's art history books as museum-worthy pieces. "I hope you don't mind, but I prefer traditional tea ceremonies for important conversations." As she prepared the tea with practiced grace, Wilson noticed the 3 monitors on her desk displaying real-time updates from ongoing negotiations across different time zones. A 4th screen showed a pending video call with the dean of Harvard Law School, likely about her upcoming lecture series. "Ms. Takeda," he began, then corrected himself. "Maya, I owe you an apology that goes beyond professional courtesy." He watched as she continued the tea preparation, her movements deliberate and calming. "My behavior in court was exactly why I accepted this meeting." Maya completed his sentence, her tone carrying no hint of resentment. She handed him a cup of tea, the aroma rich and complex. "Tell me, Judge Wilson, what do you know about the concept of kintsugi?" She gestured to a beautifully broken and repaired bowl displayed nearby, its cracks sealed with gold. "In Japanese culture, we believe that something broken can become more beautiful and valuable through repair. The same principle applies to professional relationships." Wilson sipped the tea, surprisingly moved by both the gesture and the metaphor. "I've spent the past day reviewing my court recordings," he admitted. "I saw patterns I hadn't noticed before." Maya nodded, her expression thoughtful. "When I began mediating, my grandmother told me something crucial. In every conflict, there are 3 truths: yours, mine, and the one we haven't discovered yet." She paused, allowing the wisdom to settle. "Your reputation for efficiency is well known, Judge Wilson. But efficiency without understanding is like a bridge built without foundations." The city stretched out below them, millions of stories playing out in countless buildings. In this quiet moment, high above Los Angeles, 2 professionals from different worlds found common ground in the acknowledgement of growth and the possibility of change. "Perhaps," Maya suggested, pouring a second cup of tea, "we could explore how your experience with judicial efficiency and my background in mediation might complement each other. After all, the best resolutions often come from unexpected partnerships." The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as Judge Wilson sat in his chambers, reviewing case files with newfound attention. The Swift Justice nameplate that once dominated his desk now shared space with a small jade plant, a gift from Maya that served as a daily reminder of their conversation about growth and patience. Today's docket included a complex property dispute between 2 tech startups. Typically, he would have pushed for an immediate ruling, but Maya's words echoed in his mind. The fastest resolution isn't always the most lasting one. Instead of his usual approach, he found himself studying the subtle dynamics between the competing CEOs. "Your Honor," his clerk, Jennifer Martinez, entered with another stack of files. "The Anderson case is ready," but he hesitated, noticing the meditation timer on his desk. "Another new addition. I noticed something interesting in their financial statements that might affect the bigger picture." Wilson gestured for her to continue, remembering Maya's insight about junior staff often holding crucial perspectives. Jennifer spread out the documents, revealing patterns that would have been missed in his previous rush to judgment. The case wasn't simply about patent infringement, it was about two former friends trying to protect their shared legacy. In the courtroom, whispers circulated about the changes. Judge Wilson now began each session with a moment of silence, a practice Maya had suggested for centering both himself and those present. The average case duration had increased by 7 minutes, but the appeal rate had dropped dramatically. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Wilson entered for the afternoon session. The Anderson case principals sat at their respective tables, tension visible in their postures. Instead of launching straight into proceedings, Wilson studied their body language, noting the way they unconsciously mirrored each other's movements, a detail Maya had taught him to recognize. "Before we proceed," he addressed the room, "I'd like both parties to share what they envision as an ideal outcome." The lawyers exchanged surprised glances. This wasn't the Judge Wilson they prepared for. In the gallery, a journalist from the Legal Times scribbled notes about the evolving approach of LA's formerly fastest gavel. As the CEO spoke, Wilson employed Maya's technique of active listening, noting not just their words but the emotions beneath them. The breakthrough came when he identified their shared concern about protecting their employees' jobs. Following Maya's guidance, he suggested a short recess for the parties to explore collaborative solutions. During the break, Wilson clicked through Maya's presentation from last week's judicial workshop. Her framework for identifying hidden agreements had already resolved 3 seemingly deadlocked cases. His phone buzzed with a message from the Chief Justice, congratulating him on the innovative resolution of the Martinez family estate dispute, a case that would have once ended in bitter division. Back in session, the Anderson case took an unexpected turn. Instead of battling over patents, the company's leaders found themselves discussing a joint venture. Wilson facilitated the conversation with techniques learned from Maya, watching as antagonism transformed into cautious cooperation. "Your Honor," the plaintiff's attorney began, "we'd like to request a 48-hour recess to draft a collaboration agreement." Wilson nodded, remembering Maya's words about the power of allowing natural resolution timelines. The courtroom felt different, less like a battlefield and more like a space for transformation. Later that afternoon, Wilson sat in on a mediation session led by one of Maya's colleagues. He watched in fascination as she guided feuding real estate developers toward common ground, employing the same principles he was learning to use in his courtroom. His notebook filled with observations about body language, tone, and the art of asking questions that opened new possibilities. The day's final appointment was a video call with Maya, their weekly check-in to discuss the integration of mediation principles into traditional court proceedings. His screen showed her in Singapore, where she was handling a delicate international trade dispute, but she always made time for these mentoring sessions. The goal, she reminded him, her image slightly delayed by the international connection, isn't to abandon authority, but to enhance it through understanding. Wilson shared his experience with the Anderson case, noting how slowing down had actually accelerated the path to true justice. The International Judicial Conference's main hall buzzed with anticipation. 6 months had passed since Maya and Judge Wilson's first encounter, and now they shared the stage as keynote speakers. The event's banner proclaimed, "Innovation in Justice, Bridging Efficiency and Understanding." Maya stood at the podium, elegant in an emerald Dayers suit, her jade pendant catching the spotlight. "Change in our legal system," she began, scanning the packed audience, "often comes from unexpected catalysts." Her gaze met Wilson's, sharing a subtle smile that acknowledged their journey. Behind them, slides showed statistical improvements in case resolution rates and satisfaction scores from Wilson's courtroom. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court sat in the front row, alongside representatives from judicial systems worldwide. They'd come to learn about the Los Angeles model, a hybrid approach that blended traditional court efficiency with modern mediation techniques. The Harvard Law Review had already published 2 papers about the revolutionary results. 6 months ago, Wilson took his turn at the podium, his reformed approach now as famous as his former swift justice reputation. I believed efficiency was the highest virtue in a courtroom. Ms. Tequita taught me that true efficiency comes through understanding. He shared stories of cases transformed by their new approach, including a technology dispute that ended in a groundbreaking collaboration instead of a bitter legal battle. Screens around the hall displayed real-time translations in 12 languages as Wilson described the morning that changed his perspective. The audience leaned forward when he revealed that the speaker he dismissed in traffic court turned out to be the very expert he needed most. Maya's presence beside him added power to the narrative. The parking ticket that brought us here was never about parking, Maya added, stepping forward. It was about the opportunity to bridge two approaches to justice. She gestured to data showing a 60% reduction in appeals from Wilson's court, alongside a 95% satisfaction rate with resolutions, numbers that had attracted attention from judicial systems globally. In the audience, Judge Hernandez beamed. As head of judicial training for the circuit, she'd helped implement these changes across other courtrooms. Next to her sat Kevin Park, Maya's assistant, filming the presentation for Harvard Law School's new curriculum on integrated justice approaches. Wilson shared slides of his transformed courtroom. The meditation timer on his bench, the new seating arrangement that encouraged dialogue, the pre-trial mediation options, all small changes that yielded profound results. We discovered that when you create space for understanding, justice naturally becomes more efficient. Maya touched her jade pendant, a gesture now familiar to millions who'd watched her TED talk about their story. In Japanese culture, she explained, we believe that when something breaks, we don't hide the repair. We highlight it with gold. Judge Wilson and I have created something more valuable by bringing our different approaches together. The presentation concluded with their shared vision for the future, a justice system that balanced efficiency with understanding, authority with empathy. As applause filled the hall, Wilson reflected on how far he'd come from the judge who once rushed through cases without looking up from his desk. Afterward, in the quiet of the conference room, Maya and Wilson met with a select group of judges eager to implement similar changes. The story of the parking ticket comes up in every interview, Maya remarked with amusement, sorting through requests for their upcoming judicial training program. Who would have thought? Wilson responded, reviewing the schedule for next month's international symposium they would lead together. That being wrong could lead to something so right. Maya's phone buzzed with news of another successful resolution in his courtroom, a case where the new approach had turned potential bankruptcy into a partnership. It was never about being wrong or right, she said, her wisdom now complemented by their shared experience. It was about being brave enough to see things differently. As evening fell over the conference center, their story had already inspired changes in courtrooms across 3 continents. The parking ticket that started it all hung framed in Wilson's chambers, signed by both of them, a reminder that justice, like wisdom, sometimes arrives in unexpected packages.